Welcome, everyone. We're a little lighter today because I think there are quite a few folks off for President's Day, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at the documents and the examples and get some feedback going from our group. So I wanted to start off with just a couple of reminders. So the first is that if you haven't already, if you could send me your details so I can put you in as an editor. What I'm looking for is your name, the way you want it to appear in the document, and your institution, and if you have one, your ORCID ID. And then I will put those into the document. And the other thing is that I added to the README in the GitHub, like how can you contribute back to these? So like if you are reading this offline and you say, hey, there's a typo, or maybe we could word this better, or we're just completely missing something that we need in there, you can make some suggestions for that right in GitHub. And I will just bop over there and you can see what the instructions are. So I don't know how comfortable, I know some folks are really comfortable with GitHub, and so you can use either option 1 or option 2. Option 1 is a traditional way of doing the development work in GitHub, where you clone the repository, create a branch, push it up, make a PR. And so for folks who do development stuff, that may be their more comfortable path. For folks who don't, there is option 2, where you can edit right directly in GitHub. And I put links to both the documents there that are our primary documents right now. And on each page, you can just click edit, and it will let you do the editing right in GitHub. And at the end, you say you want to commit the changes, and it will go ahead and create a new branch and create a PR associated with that change. And then that lets people review what your proposal is, and then we can get it in from that path. Anyone have questions about that?
That sounds good.
Okay. So I put to do the external recommendations first, and then to go over the notifications, but I think I'm actually going to do it in the other order, because I think there's a lot more that's changed. Well, the examples didn't exist last time, so that there's a lot more room for feedback there, and then we can look at the recommendations with the time we have remaining. So I created a landing page, and right now there is just the notifications. That's the only example I created because I wanted to get some consensus around that, because the other two build off of that example. And there's a couple of points to the examples, and I just put some of that information in here so that people could follow along. It's got a little bit about what the directory structure to expect, how file names are, and a little bit about all that. So we'll just jump right in. Hopefully this stuff doesn't look completely new, because this follows a lot of the stuff we've already talked about and the examples that we have in the other documentation. So one slight change is that as I look closer at it, there was a little bit different recommendation on how you put in the context. You first identify activity streams as the primary context, and then our extensions go after that. And this extension, the context document, needs a little more work, but that is where we identify what things we are going to use out of the main activity streams, and then how do we define the extensions and other things that we put in there as well. So I'm probably gonna have to take another look at that to see if there's more information needed, but that's at least a start on it. And then of course, this is our entry point, which is an ordered collection. This is self-referential. So if I click it, we just stay on the same page. And then we have our first and last of the change sets, which are ordered collection pages. So if I click on the first one, you'll see that all of these have just a few items in each one. And that's because I wanted to make sure I had 4 pages so we could see how next and previous work. And I also wanted to make sure that each of our activity types, each of our activity types has an example, at least one. And so the structure here is it's an order collection page. Again, self-referential ID. The part of links back to the entry point, so it just goes back to it. And then we have a next, which will take us to the next change set page, but I'm not going to do that just yet. And we only have 2 items on this page. So this page is basically add and create. I just did 2 activities for that. Normally, a change set could have like thousands of ordered items in it, hundreds, thousands. It just depends on how long the frequency is between the times that the producer releases a change set. So I just put in the examples showing a summary. So one of the things that this page showed was about summaries, and it talks about the fact that this is the typical summary up until you get to the parenthetical, and then everything in the parentheses is just commentary. So it's saying you're using add when it already exists in the data source, but it's not yet available through the feed. And a new, it's newly created in the data source. So just to give some hints as to when would you use add and when would you use create in the examples themselves. This also has an ID. This goes out to a page that just talks about that particular activity. And it's the same information, just in a slightly different form because it has everything on the uppermost level. So what's not here, because this is just notifications, there's no instrument that would give any kind of patch information. So it's just saying an add happened, and it doesn't give you any information about what kind of triples there are in that add. So same with the subject. The rest of them will go pretty quick because they're basically the same format. So the only thing different here in the upper section is now we have a previous to the first page and a next to the next page. Here is just the remove, delete, and update, again, with reminders about the difference between remove and delete, and not really any other information there. This is where it gets a little more interesting because I did 3 examples of deprecate. And one is when a replacement doesn't exist yet, so you're going to create something as part of it. So one question I need to, that's an error there, that should be deprecate. So that type is wrong. I'll have to go in and fix that. So one question I had is, this says type deprecate, and then it has ordered items. And this says, this should be saying deprecate as well. And I don't know if that's okay to do that, to have like the same type embedded in a particular type. So I just need to check and see if that's okay to do. But the basic gist is we have to create its replacement first because it doesn't exist. And then we do a deprecation. So the object is the thing being deprecated, and the use instead is the thing that's replacing it. And so I would also note that use instead is also an extension because there is no use instead in standard activity streams.
So Lynette, just
yes.
Sort of a semantics question. Since the wrapper type is deprecate, isn't the inner deprecate actually an update to the existing subject?
So yeah, that's a good point. Maybe it should be update, but let me show you the next one, because the next one is a deprecate when the replacement already exists, and it does use the type deprecate, and it still has the object in the use instead. But we could just make that an update, which would make that an update, but then it sort of asks the question of, do we need a deprecate at all? Is deprecate just an update that has multiple items?
Fair enough.
And that question is going to come up again with split and merge. So I'm definitely open to feedback, because as I was writing these, I had the same thought. And there is a deprecation that happens where there's no replacement. The term's just not being used anymore, so it's being deprecated, and they don't really have a recommendation. The one reason that I sort of lean towards having a deprecate is because part of what you're signaling here is that this is a particular kind of update, and people might want to take a specific action when deprecations happen versus just a general update where like a label got changed. So I definitely would want to get some feedback from the group on that. Anyone else has some thoughts they want to throw in on that?
I like the simplicity of just having it be like another type of update, but I do think that there's a use case where people are going to want to be able to demarcate deprecated things versus every other type of update, like you said.
Well, I guess the other issue is using deprecate for the inner one in case 1 means it matches case 2.
Right. And it may not be a problem to have a deprecate type on the outside and the inside. I have to look up and see if the standard says anything about that. I don't think they have any examples like that, but I have to think about that some more. And if others have a time to look at the standard and think about that as well, I'm definitely open to some input on that, because that was the one quirky thing when I was going through this that I didn't feel quite comfortable having it that way. Seemed a little odd. I think merge and split are a little more straightforward because there's no conflict with inner and outer types. So the last page shows the split and merge. So we have a split, and it's a series of 2 creates and then a deprecate. And it's, you could see somebody using a delete here. It's not recommended, but a delete or a remove, we don't really control what the producers want to do. So we're just trying to give them the tools that let them do that. But we're going to show what we really consider best practice, which really is to deprecate it and not delete it. But there could be a case where it gets removed because of permissions issues or something like that. There are other examples that we could put here, but it's a pretty, and they could split it into 3, in which case there might be, 3, 4, or 5 creates followed by a deprecate with some use insteads. And the merge is very similar. In this case, we're only creating 1 because we're merging multiples into 1. And then we have a couple of deprecates of the old ones, with them also pointing to the use instead. And that is the basic gist of the examples. Any thoughts on the split or merge examples, which are also these sort of compound activities?
Well, going back to the deprecation, I think having deprecate nested inside the splits and merges argues that it's okay to have a deprecate inside a deprecate.
That if we can have deprecate inside a split and merge, it's okay to have it in the deprecate as well?
Yeah. Because then the design patterns look equivalent.
Yeah. I definitely don't think I would want like some other type here. I mean, that wouldn't make sense to me.
No.
Any other thoughts on the examples? Any questions or anything? I was actually fairly happy with the way this laid out. I thought it went pretty smooth, and that I thought was very good, in that our examples that we had created previously do seem to be holding. And I can see the next step fairly easily of adding in an instrument that puts in RDF patch to demonstrate how you'd actually change these documents, these particular entities.
I think the human comprehensibility on this is pretty good. I mean, it reads reasonably intuitively, and having looked at a bunch of specs, this is about, I think, as clean as you're going to get it.
All right. So the other thing I did, you'll see that folks who have sent me their editor information, I have put it in the document. So this is another opportunity for me to say, if you haven't sent me your editor information, you can send it and I will plop it in there.
I did it this morning.
Excellent. I will look for that. So I did put in these blocks just to make them stand out more. So anytime there's some kind of question or something that I know we still need to do, I put it in a block like this. I think that just makes it stand out a little easier. We'll know when we've cleaned everything up, when all these orange boxes are gone. Okay, so looking at some stuff from last time, I did clean up the introduction. So what I don't want to do in the meeting is like read through all the text, because I think that would be kind of tedious for us. So I hope that folks will have time offline to read through the actual text, look for, do some wordsmithing, because I'm sure there's some places where we could clean some stuff up. But I did tighten up the introduction from what it was last time we looked at it, because I want the introduction to be a very simple way to sort of grok the whole thing, what we're trying to do here, and not have a lot of complexities in it. And then the objectives and scope will have a little more details about what we're doing and what we're you know, how we're doing it, where are the limits of it, what are we not doing, that kind of stuff. And so there is this block in the middle that's in red, and that's basically saying that right now, everything we're proposing is a polling. So the feed goes out and you have to actively go out and poll the feed to get more information, as opposed to something pushing something out to someone who is subscribed to a notification. We did talk about that some in the group, and it doesn't mean that we can't at a later time expand this to include a subscription notification type pattern, but I don't think it's probably not the best thing for us to start by putting both of those out there, because I think that might just make it complex. The other recommendation from last time was that we move objectives and scope up and then use cases under that. So I did that as well. I don't think the use case section, I don't think I updated anything there. And then I did expand out the terminology a little more, but there's not a whole lot of changes here either. That can definitely expand out more. So like I put in a couple of terms, but didn't actually give them definitions, and I don't have anything under activity streams. I did throw in a couple more specifications that are used. So that's filled out a little more. There was a request to put more information at the start of the architecture section to talk a little more about activity streams in general and how we're using them. And there was a request last time to update the diagram to be more consistent with ER diagrams. And both of those are still on my list to do. So I just didn't get to those. So I do want to recognize that those are still planned to happen. So one of the things I did is I put in these references at the top of each section, so that instead of like someone having to read through and then find ordered collection here to get a link to click to it, it's right at the top. So if they come back later and they want to read more about ordered collections as they're defined in activity streams, it's very clear where it is right at the top, and they don't have to read through the paragraphs to find the appropriate link. I do still have some questions about dates in general, and I maybe we'll circle back to that if we still have time. So each section, and this is pretty similar to what it was last time, each section is going to follow through with each part of this is a full example, and then it does each part of the example. So you'll see a context, summary, type, ID. Each one of those sections is described down here. And so this is the context piece, the summary. So each of those are there. So one of the things that I am doing is this is for the entry point. I'm going to actually point this out later. So this is for the entry point. And then we have something similar for the change set, where there's the reference stuff at the top, some general descriptions of how you actually use it, what you really must do, and things that you might want to do as part of that. And then it gives a full example. And that section's not filled out yet. I still have to go through and do the details for that. And so one of the changes I did last time so like if we look over here on this part, you can see that structurally, I put the entry point and change set in one section because they're organizational. And then when you get to the specific types, they have the change notification, which is what we looked at in the notifications examples. And then it's going to have a patch. And each of those can be slightly different for each of the types. So I split those out in the types. And these are going to be general stuff. So what I wanted to do, though, is not have to repeat myself a ton under the various types. I don't want to define summary and type and ID over and over again. So they'll be done at the high level. And then the only thing that'll be done at this level will be the things that are different, unique for that particular type. And that's basically where we are. So I guess I'm still looking for general feedback on structure from inside the meeting, and then I'm hoping folks will read it outside to give more detailed recommendations. Any thoughts on what we've looked at?
Well, I'm a biased sample, but I think this is nicely elaborated, and it's going to be, approachable by people who have, shall we say, not quite the technical exposure that you and I have at this level of stuff. which I think is important. I guess, who is our target audience for this? This isn't going to be, just general catalogers. This is going to be people who are basically platform admin types, isn't it? Or
yeah, so I think it's got several audiences, and that is why I'm trying to walk that line of giving details that someone who is going to take this and write on the producer side, how do I make this happen? Because you've got that audience, and they're probably going to be really technically savvy on this because they write tools all the time. And then you're going to have the people who are going to write automation tools to process it, the developers, and they're also going to be very technically savvy in how to deal with this. But I do think there is another audience that's going to want to just understand what kinds of information they can get from these feeds, who, would have varying levels of technical skills, because there are a lot of folks in the library who are in the catalogers and other areas that have a lot of technical skills and really follow this stuff. So, but I do want to make it approachable for each level.
the only real precondition, I think, in terms of technical expertise is they've got to be able to look at a JSON construct and understand what they're looking at.
Yeah.
Braces versus brackets, for instance.
Right. Yeah, because I don't do that, but there is the terminology section that has links out to that. So
Yeah.
So you can get links out, and it does talk a little bit about the fact that the way things are structured is in JSON. Any other thoughts? This might end up being a short meeting today. The other big thing I didn't do yet is I haven't put anything under producing entity changes and consuming entity changes. Takes a lot of time to write this, so a bit at a time. I just have to keep making some incremental updates.
Plus, you need me as a guinea pig to see what I do in terms of doing one of these, right?
Yes, and I thought about that because we talked about that last time. The thing that might make it a little different than what we're actually hoping is neither Getty nor LOC do instruments with the RDF patch. So from the perspective of having an RDF patch that you can just apply to your repository, you really only have the notification system side. So you just know which objects changed, and you're not even going to know, like, is it a deprecation split or merge? They are only using base core activity type. So it'll be interesting. Yes, I'm looking forward to that. See how it goes. Jim or Eric, do either of you have any more thoughts about?
Not at the moment, but I'm gonna spend some time reviewing the document in more detail this week.
That'll be excellent. I'm definitely hoping to get like an overall, like, how is this laying out for folks? Because there's a lot of details that are going into it. And if something needs to shift in how it's being laid out, earlier does make it easier to do that shifting around. So yeah, any feedback is very welcome.
Do you recommend prerequisite reading before jumping into this? Is it the like the spec for like RDF patch or something?
So that's an interesting question. Maybe we should have a section in there, like recommended readings. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, that's why I try to lay it out in a way where you don't have to read the activity streams and understand the activity streams before you can actually jump into this document. And so if you haven't like really read up on activity streams, I would be very interested in what your perception is of, is it easy to read this without having studied activity streams first? So we might want to rope in some folks from the outside who haven't done anything in our group to get them to read it as well, but maybe get a little further along before we do that.
Yeah, I'll spend like Eric said, I think I need to give it a closer read this week, and then I can send you some comments on the structure.
Okay, that all sounds good. I'm guessing at this point, then maybe we just call this a short meeting today. And hopefully we'll have more folks back next time. And I'll also be encouraging people to go ahead and take a look at the document and start providing feedback. you can do that feedback by sending it directly to me, or you can put it in GitHub. I put in the way of how to like edit pages, but if you just want to make a suggestion, you can do that as an issue. So you can put in any issues you want, describing anything you want. If you have an actual change to the document you want to do, then you can do the editing part. So either way is fine. Or just sending it to me is also fine. Well, thank you for coming on President's Day. I know it's really hard to get out and not be part of that holiday, so I'm glad you guys all made it.
All right. Talk to you later.